Welcome to Fated, a podcast brought to you by Magella and Carlie, two romantasy-obsessed readers who believe that great books must include declarations of undying love and deep thrusts of desire. Diving into the spicy, smutty fantasy genre, we are here for both the rattling of stars and headboards, and our podcast starts with the worlds of SJM, but delves into other realms. Did we mention that washboard abs and wands of all kinds are welcome in this inclusive and magically charged space? No topic is off limits, and no one is forced to have only one favourite heroine. Welcome to Fated, where we are unabashedly and wholeheartedly hot and heavy for spicy fantasy fiction. It's time to sit down and smut up. Warning, spoilers ahead.
Hello friends, welcome to Fated, the podcast. I am Carlie and I am doing a solo cast this week. Magella is off doing other wonderful things in the world, and I had a conversation that is kind of hot on my heart and I wanted to bring it to you guys. It has been a quieter month for both Magella and I in our reading. I'm starting to learn that in November that my life is really, really busy with lots of end of year stuff. So kids are wrapping up school, graduation and end of year festivities. The Christmas parties are starting. My work is actually quite busy as we wrap up the school term because I work in schools, and life just feels really social and full and wonderful, but it really has impacted on my reading. And I know that for Magella, she's been in a bit of a reading space where she just wants to revisit books that she's loved. So there's not a lot of new stories coming through for both of us. That said, I recently read and finished Phantasma by Kaylie Smith, and it's been percolating in my mind around some of the feelings that I had in that book. For me, as someone who works in the mental health space, and I work with young people, I work with adolescents, 12 to 18 years old. And as I was reading Phantasma, I was thinking about the young people that I work with who have poor mental health for lots of different reasons, and who maybe don't see themselves represented in books as much as they would like. And so if you haven't read Phantasma, I'm going to say this. There might be some general kind of spoilers around the book. I'm definitely not going to share much about plot or the character arcs, and I'm not going to share like my favorite parts of the book or book quotes, but I am going to talk about some of the general premises around mental health and well-being in this book. And I'm hoping that Magella will read this book very soon and we can do a joint review, because it was a really great read. It was very fast-paced, as a lot of our fantasy romance novels with trials in them are, and that is incredible because it keeps obviously the plot moving. It keeps us really engrossed and engaged in the story. So yes, I hope Magella and I can do a review of it soon, because it was great. It was a really great read. But this episode, I want to talk in particular about reading and mental health, and I guess bringing in the genre that this podcast is about, although I really like to have this conversation across lots of different genres. But I think there's some nuance and some uniqueness to the fantasy genre, how it can really support our mental well-being. Now, I am someone who has been incredibly fortunate to be mentally well the majority of my life. That said, I have a lot of family members who've struggled with mental health over the years and who have chronic poor mental health as well. And of course, because of the work I do, I'm really curious about how it's depicted in our stories and how we can use reading fantasy or escaping into fantastical worlds to support and boost our mental health. So there's a couple of elements I want to talk to in this podcast episode, and I hope you'll stay with me and I hope you'll comment as well. I'd really love to have this conversation with you guys in a book club, on our emails, or on our socials, of course, as well. So the first thing I kind of sat down and thought about was, obviously, broadly, we know that reading helps mental health in a number of different ways. We know that sitting down to read a book offers our brain a reprieve from the constant bombardment of stimulation that we have from things like social media. The colossal amount of information that our brains are expected to absorb each day now in our current fast-paced world, where we have access to everything in our hand, in the palm of our hand, on our phone. Reading gives our brain a beautiful single focus. It allows our attention to be fixed on reading one word at a time. So we know that a lot of research has been done on reading. We know that it reduces stress levels considerably. I heard a piece of research recently that said that even just reading a couple of pages of a story, actual book before you go to sleep, increases your sleep quality by around 20 to 30%. We know that it is a really beautiful self-care tool, and it is one of the best out there because books and reading is generally inexpensive, or can be inexpensive or free if you have access to local libraries, or you're able to get ARC copies of books from publishers, or you can borrow some books from a friend, or you can engage in a book swap or a book club. A lot of the time it's inexpensive and quite accessible to be able to read. We know that the research shares that reading can reduce our sense of loneliness and isolation. So even though our characters in our books are imaginary, our brain will still feel like they're our friends. And we know this, Majella and I talk about how we become friends in our minds and in our hearts with the characters in our books. And sometimes when those characters are killed off or do something really atrocious, like we feel that viscerally in our bodies. We have that response because we feel like we're connected to them. We know that the research says that reading reduces anxiety, but we also, I just wanted to throw in there that it is incredible for our brains because reading lights up the imagination part of our brain. It also can give us a sense of hope if our real world, which, let's be honest, at the moment, our real world feels pretty wild and has done for quite a while. If our real world feels really unstable, our books can sometimes offer us a sense of hope and a sense of, well, things could be different. We're not sure how, and we maybe feel really helpless in our real world, but in romantasy, we have these incredible female main characters mainly. That's mainly what Majella and I are reading at the moment. Female main characters where they are just kick-ass, badass women who are breaking barriers, dismantling systems, burning things to the ground and offering a new way. And I guess as fictitious as that is, it offers our brain and our hearts a sense of things could be different and things could be more hopeful. We also know that young people that read have better problem-solving abilities, and I'm going to just extrapolate that out to adults as well, but the research I've read was mainly done on young children, small children, and young adults. They have more problem-solving abilities. How cool is that? Because they can see possibility. They can, in their mind, be like, well, hang on, that main character that I love in that series was able to solve problems in this way or look at situations in this way. And so that that flows on to these young people in this research sharing that they're able to look at situations and think of different solutions to the narrative that's being presented to them. So I guess just in a nutshell, we kind of know all of that. We know when we look at research, you can do a quick Google search. You talk to anyone that is a reader, they'll say that reading calms their heart rate, calms their mind, helps them sleep better, gives them a single focus, gives them a sense of hope and excitement, and they really enjoy it. There's a huge pleasure element there too. So of course, all of that is really positive and can impact positively on your mental health. But in particular, I want to talk about Phantasma because it was the first fantasy romance book that I've read, and I've read a lot this year. Predominantly, I've read fantasy romance, gothic, romantasy, and although I've read also straight romantasy and some lit fic and other adult fiction, Phantasma made me stop and pause and think about how OCD and anxiety and depression are represented in the stories that we read. And I've been thinking back through the books that I've read over the year around in this genre, and I see threads of this in so many of our stories. I see threads of different mental health challenges with our characters. But this book really shone an incredible light on OCD in particular. And I now know, because I've gone and listened to a couple of interviews with Kaylie Smith, the author, I know that this is something that she has found really, really challenging in her own life. And so she wanted to bring this to the page, and she wanted this to be representative of what it can be like to live with OCD and anxiety. And we often see this in authors. They'll say that, this is something that has been really internal to me, and I want to bring it out and put it on the page in a way that could help other people connect with it, but also for their own kind of purging, processing, understanding of this thing that they live with. And so it was really cool to hear Kaylie talk about that in some of the interviews and the little snippets that I've grabbed off social media, about how that OCD and anxiety was kind of the main idea of the story, and then she created the narrative around that. Kaylie felt that was not something that had really been written about a lot, and I, again, myself, I'm trying to recall. I don't recall OCD in particular. I do recall books like Two Twisted Crowns and One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig, the monster in her mind. But again, in that story, the monster ended up being, you could take that book a couple of different ways, I guess, but the monster really was someone separate from her. Whereas in Phantasma, the monster is her. It's a part of her. It's her mental health voice. It's the voice inside her that tells her to tap 3 times, or her people in her life are going to die, right? Or to say something 5 times, or something really bad's going to happen. This sense of, if you don't do this, this will happen and it will not be pleasant. Kaylie talks about she hasn't seen it written exactly like that before. And I kind of agree with the books that I've read, that I haven't seen that. And so, we've got in Phantasma, we hear this voice in Ophelia's head that they, refer to as the shadow. I think it's a really great way to refer to it. It's what a lot of the people in my life who've struggled with poor mental health have called it, like the dark cloud, the black cloud, the shadow. I think that's a really great term. And so we hear that throughout the narrative of the story. And then we also have this question, like, what is that? Is that real? Is that not? Is that a part of her? Is that her mental illness? What is that? And I had this sort of these thoughts as I was reading through the story, because you're also then in a really fantastical setting. So in Phantasma, we're in this setting of what's real and what's not. So I don't want to give too much away, spoiler, but like some of the scenes in that, some of the main characters had to decipher, was it real or was it not? And there's a lot of mystery. It's like a carnival house, and what's a trick and what's real was a storyline throughout that we, as the reader, got to go on that ride as well, which was really, really cool. I really liked how Kaylie depicted the OCD and anxiety that Ophelia experienced as the shadow for another reason. I think it gave a real tangibility to something that isn't tangible. And I think that can really help us start to understand. Me as a reader, I was like, is that really what it's like for someone with OCD? I'm sure someone reading this story with OCD and struggling with anxiety would read that and say, oh my gosh, that's exactly what it's like for me, or it's somewhat what it's like for me, or yes, at times that is exactly what I experience. And in Kaylie's interview, she said she's had a lot of messages from people saying, thank you, I don't see OCD depicted in this genre, and it is what I experience, and thank you so much for creating this, because it does make me feel somewhat less alone. I was really fascinated by that. The other element that I really loved was how throughout the story we saw how the main characters around Ophelia supported her to understand the OCD and the anxiety, and how her mind was running away from her. And some characters really played with that and manipulated that and used that to their advantage and their agenda. So in particular, we have the main male character of Blackwell. Some of the most tender and impactful moments of this book for me were when he was helping her slow her mind down, and really trying to allow the space for her to come back and figure out what was her and what was not, and how he really gently reminded her of who she was, that she was safe, And there was a lot of scenes in there. I thought, this is pretty much my mental health training. This is what I do with young people when they come in with a panic attack, or they're really feeling like their OCD is getting on top of them, and it's becoming very, very debilitating in their daily life, and they're unable to get to school because of it, or they're unable to maintain relationships because of it, or they're physically harming themselves because of it. So the fact that Kaylie has put characters in there that have helped in lots of different ways, I think back to how the main character Ophelia's mother would have helped as well with that. Her sister, there's elements there, but mainly it was Blackwell and how he brought her down when she was way, way, way up in her head. So that was really, really cool. The other element, I guess, around reading and mental health is around the sense of community that we can build with reading. There are a lot of people in the world that feel really lonely. We are in the midst of a loneliness epidemic, and we are the most connected that we've ever been in our lives. And I'm really happy. Like, it actually makes me really jubilant to think about the people out there who are sitting in their homes, maybe feeling disconnected and alone physically, not around humans, but they can jump into an online book club and have a beautiful conversation and share how they're feeling and have some excitement and pleasure and really talk about the things that light them up. And we see this in our Fable book club. We see people from all over the world jumping in and saying, oh my gosh, who's read chapter 21 and what did you think? And or ask a question or gain some clarity if they're confused about the plot line. And these are people that I'll never meet. Magella will probably never meet, most of them anyway. We hope to meet some of them at some point. But we think about like the possibility there of how we could, with just one comment or one book or one conversation about a chapter, make someone feel seen and heard and validated and connected. Like, that's just so freaking cool. And reading does that. I think about when I walk into a library, I automatically feel like I'm part of a group and part of a community. I know that libraries really aim to build that sense of connection with the community, especially with those who are disadvantaged and isolated. Reading gives us a sense of being part of something. And this is also why fandoms grow and people get so excited about the next books that are coming out and going to book conventions and joining these communities like the Potterheads, like the Sarah J. Maas fans. And yeah, it's really, really cool to see. And so reading can build connection if you're willing to put yourself out there a little bit and say, hey, I really like these books. Magella and I, sometimes we feel a little bit like, oh God, what are we doing? We're in our 40s, we're getting on and talking about fantasy romance, we're talking about fake characters, and, is it really that cool and that amazing? And then I read something like Phantasma and I think if Kaylie Smith didn't write that book, there'd be so many people out there with OCD and anxiety that would just continue to feel alone or go through life not really having a grasp of how it impacts them. Even if someone has just read that book and thought, I am now going to call my OCD the shadow and I now have an understanding of it's not me. Or if they come away with a few different tips on how to help themselves through that. I don't know. I just think if anyone leaves reading that book feeling more seen and heard, I think that's an incredible thing. And that's, I believe, why people write and why we gobble up the stories. And I'm excited to read more from Kaylie. And all of that aside, it was a really great book and we'll do a full review at some point on it. But that's all I really wanted to talk about today. And I'm really curious to hear from our audience about how reading helps your mental health. How does it support your self-care? It might not be to the extent of where you have been diagnosed with anxiety or OCD or struggle with poor mental health. It might be your self-care routine. I know for me, the feeling I get when I get home from a full day of working and supporting people with mental health and other trauma-related life circumstances, and I love on my kids and do all of the mum stuff, that feeling of, oh my gosh, I get to get into bed soon and dive into a fantasy world and connect with characters that I'm loving, and or just a fiction book that I'm really, really enjoying devouring, because I like to read so many different genres, or a memoir or an autobiography that I'm really happy to learn about someone else's life and step in their shoes. I get so excited about that I feel my body immediately calm down. I feel my brain starting to switch off. And then when I get into bed and I'm snuggled in my bed and it's just the most delightful, blissful experience, and I have my Kindle or my book, I'm so happy. And it just gives me, in a really crazy, busy day where I give so much, it gives me replenishment and rejuvenation. And yes, I might lose a little bit of sleep sometimes because I'm so into a book, but mostly it just allows my brain to breathe before I go to sleep. So it helps me. I'd love to hear from you guys. How has it helped you? What books have you read where you felt really represented with anything that's going on in your life, but in particular, let's do mental health? What other books have you read where you felt really represented, or your mental health challenges have felt really well written and depicted, so you could connect with it and you could understand it a little bit more, or you could share it with a friend and say, hey, this is how I feel? We'd love to know. And I think that I'm going to go and have a think as well about other books that have impacted me in that way. I hope you're having a really great reading week and enjoy your reading. Use it for connection. If you'd like to join a community that's frothing on fantasy romance, we've got our Fable Book Club. And yeah, we'd love to see you in there and connect with you. We just want more people reading. Let's reduce some mental health stress. Let's improve our self-care practices. Reading is super healthy for us. So have a great reading week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope that you felt like you were eavesdropping on a conversation that you have been dying to have with someone, to discuss all the tiny details and possible plot twists of the books that you've recently read. Perhaps you don't have someone to chat to after you finish one of those epic books, so please give the show a follow, and we would be honoured to be your book-obsessed friends. But mostly though, we hope it was fun. It gave you a giggle, it made you gasp, or encouraged you to pick up a different author. Please share it with someone who you think would also love it, and drop us a review, letting us know what you loved and what you want to hear from us in the future. We will be back with another episode soon. Happy reading.